My son tried to forge my signature on a new will that would give him everything I owned, so I smiled, nodded, and the next morning changed the locks on the house he thought was his. He came home from his luxury vacation in Cabo, paid for with money he stole from me, and stood on that porch with his key in his hand, confused why it wouldn't turn. Because when your own blood treats you like a wallet, you don't owe them the keys to your kingdom. But what he didn't know would cost him everything: the house, the inheritance, his reputation, his family. If you've ever been used by family, if you've ever felt like an ATM with a heartbeat, stay with me. You'll want to hear how this ends, because some stories don't finish with forgiveness. Some finish with new locks and old lessons. My son Daniel tried to steal my life's work while I was still breathing, but to understand why I did what I did, you need to know how we got here. It started 40 years ago in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was 32 years old, standing in a cemetery with the sun beating down on my black dress and my 8-year-old son gripping my hand so tight I thought his little fingers might break. My husband Carlos had died in a construction accident. One moment he was sending me a text saying he'd be home for dinner. The next, a foreman was at my door with his hard hat in his hands and tears in his eyes. We had $1,700 in the bank, no life insurance, no family money, just me, Daniel, and a future that felt like staring into a canyon with no bottom. I was a potter. I made bowls and mugs in our garage, sold them at farmers' markets on weekends. It wasn't a career. It was a hobby that made grocery money, but now it had to be everything, so I worked. I worked like my life depended on it because it did. I bought clay in bulk, stayed up until 3 a.m. throwing pots on a wheel I'd bought used for $200. My hands cracked and bled from the wet clay and the dry desert air. I started making turquoise jewelry too. Bought raw stones from a Navajo man at the flea market. Learned to polish and set them in silver wire I bent with pliers at my kitchen table. I set up a stand at the rail yard every Saturday and Sunday. Daniel would sit on a folding chair next to me, doing his homework on a clipboard while tourists walked by. He never complained, not once. I missed his soccer games because I was at craft fairs in Albuquerque. Missed his school plays because I was delivering custom orders to galleries in Taos. But he always had new shoes, always had lunch money, always had a warm house and a mother who kissed him goodnight, even if she smelled like clay dust and exhaustion. By the time he was in high school, my little hobby had become a legitimate business. I had a studio behind our house. I employed 2 other women. My work was in 6 galleries across the state. And Daniel was thriving. Honor roll, varsity soccer, accepted to the University of New Mexico with a partial scholarship. The rest of the tuition? I sold my only car, a 1998 Honda Civic that had 200,000 miles on it but still ran. I sold it to a neighbor for $3,000 and rode the bus for the next 3 years so my son could get his degree debt-free. I remember the day he graduated, cap and gown, walking across that stage. He found me in the crowd afterward, wrapped his arms around me and said, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know. I'll make you proud." And I believed him. For a while, I was right too. He got a job at a marketing firm in Albuquerque, rented a little apartment, called me every Sunday, visited for dinner once a month, brought flowers on my birthday. Then he met Vanessa. She was polished, blonde, from a family with money, the kind of money that came from oil leases and generational real estate. Her father owned a car dealership. Her mother was on the board of the country club. And from the moment Daniel brought her home, I could feel her measuring me. The way she looked at my pottery studio like it was a shed. The way she smiled too tight when I served her pozole in handmade bowls. The way she called my turquoise jewelry charming in a voice that meant cheap. But Daniel loved her. so I kept my mouth shut. They got married in a ceremony that cost $40,000. I paid for half of it. Vanessa's parents made it very clear they were covering the important parts: the venue, the photographer, the live band. I paid for the flowers and the rehearsal dinner. I didn't complain. He was my son. I'd give him the world if I could. Then came the business ventures. First, it was the tech startup. Daniel had an idea for an app that would connect local artisans with buyers. He needed $45,000 to get it off the ground. I gave it to him, every cent I'd saved for my retirement. The app launched. It lasted 6 months. Then it folded because Daniel didn't understand marketing and Vanessa didn't understand budgets. I told him it was okay. These things happen. Try again. So he did. A consulting firm. He and Vanessa would help small businesses with social media and branding. Another $30,000. This time I had to take out a loan against my studio. It collapsed in 8 months. I didn't say anything. I just worked harder, took on more custom orders, started teaching weekend pottery classes to make back what I'd lost. But the phone calls changed. Sunday dinners stopped unless I offered to pay. Birthday visits became text messages, and when he did call, it was always the same. "Mom, I'm busy. Can you just Venmo me? I'll explain later." I was 60 years old when I bought the house. It was a beautiful adobe home in Albuquerque's North Valley. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a casita in the back, cottonwood trees in the yard, a view of the Sandia Mountains. It cost $385,000. I paid cash. 40 years of pottery and jewelry and blood and exhaustion, and I finally had something solid, something that couldn't collapse or disappear or be taken by the bank. I put it in my name, just my name. For estate planning, I told Daniel, to protect the asset. He didn't ask questions. Then Vanessa got pregnant, and their apartment felt too small. They needed space, a yard, a place to grow. I offered to let them live in the house temporarily, just until they got on their feet. I'd stay in the casita, give them the main house. It was temporary. That's what we agreed. Temporary turned into a year, then 2, then 5. Daniel stopped asking if it was okay. He just assumed. He painted the walls without telling me. Vanessa redecorated. They started calling it our house when they talked to friends. And I let them, because I wanted him close. I wanted to believe that if I gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, he'd see me as more than a checkbook. But I was wrong. The calls became colder, the visits shorter. Christmas felt like a business meeting. Thanksgiving, he'd show up for an hour, eat, and leave. I started to realize something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his retirement plan. And the worst part? I kept pretending I didn't notice. I kept telling myself, he's just busy. He's stressed. He'll come around. But he didn't come around. He came for my will. I found out on a Tuesday afternoon in October, standing in the lobby of my bank, holding a deposit slip and trying to remember where I'd parked. A young woman approached me, mid-20s, nervous eyes, badge clipped to her belt that said, "Legal Assistant." Her name was Jessica. She looked over her shoulder, then leaned in close and whispered, "Mrs. Alvarez, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I think you need to know. Your son was here last week with a lawyer. They were asking about your accounts, your assets. They had paperwork." I blinked at her. My brain couldn't process the words fast enough. "What kind of paperwork?" She bit her lip. Her hands were shaking. "A revised will and a power of attorney document. They said you were developing dementia and that Daniel needed to take control of your finances before you hurt yourself." The floor tilted. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Dementia. Power of attorney. Revised will. I hadn't been to a lawyer in 5 years. I hadn't signed anything. Jessica reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me like it was burning her fingers. This is a copy of the signature page. I made it before I left work yesterday. I could lose my job for this, but you've always been kind to me, and this isn't right. I unfolded the paper. There it was, my name, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Whoever forged it had practiced. But the E in Elena was too sharp. The loop in the Z was wrong. I stared at that paper until the letters blurred. My son had tried to steal my life. Jessica touched my arm gently. He's claiming you're incompetent, that you can't manage your own affairs. He had a medical assessment from a doctor named... I've never seen a doctor by that name. Jessica nodded. I didn't think so. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. My hands weren't shaking yet, but I knew they would be soon. Thank you, Jessica. She squeezed my arm. Be careful, Mrs. Alvarez. He seemed determined. I walked out of that bank like I was walking through water. Everything felt slow and thick and wrong. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. Then I drove to the credit union where I kept my safe deposit box. The woman at the desk recognized me. She smiled and asked about my pottery. I smiled back and said something polite, but I don't remember what. She led me to the vault, handed me the metal box, left me alone in the little room with the buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper. I opened the box. Inside was my real will, the one I'd drafted 6 years ago with my attorney Maria, the one that left everything to Daniel, yes, but also set aside funds for my employees and a scholarship for single mothers in New Mexico. Also inside, the deed to the house. I pulled it out, read it carefully, every word. Elena Maria Alvarez, Sole owner, purchased October 2018, no co-signers, no joint tenancy. Daniel's name was nowhere on that document. He'd been living in my house for 5 years and never once asked whose name was on the deed. He just assumed. I sat there in that little room, holding the deed in my hands, and something inside me cracked open. Not sadness, not yet. Rage. Pure, cold, clarifying rage. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every missed birthday, every sold car, every sleepless night. Every time I'd said yes when I should have said no. And he repaid me by trying to declare me incompetent, by forging my signature, by telling people I was losing my mind so he could take everything I'd built. I put the deed back in the box, locked it, walked out of that vault with my shoulders straight and my jaw set. I got back in my truck, and then I cried. Not the soft, sad kind of crying, the kind that comes from deep in your chest and shakes your whole body, the kind that tastes like salt and rage and grief. I cried for the son I thought I had, the one who'd hugged me at graduation and called me strong, because that boy was gone. The man who replaced him was a stranger, a thief, a liar. I sat there in that parking lot with the desert wind blowing through the cracked window, and I let myself mourn. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove home. Because mourning was over. Now it was time to plan. He wanted my legacy. He'd get exactly what he earned. Nothing. I didn't confront Daniel right away. I'm not impulsive. I don't scream or throw things or make threats I can't keep. I plan. The next morning, I called Luis Herrera. He was a retired police detective who'd started doing private investigation work. I'd met him at a gallery opening years ago. Good man. Honest. Thorough. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, Mrs. Alvarez, I've seen a lot of family fraud in my 30 years. This is as bad as it gets. Can you prove it? Give me a week. He called me back in 5 days. What he found made my stomach turn. Daniel had been using my old credit card, the one I'd given him years ago for emergencies, to fund a lifestyle I didn't even recognize. Luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, $8,000. First-class flights to Denver for a ski trip, $4,000. A down payment on a BMW, $12,000. Luis had photos, receipts, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals from an old joint account I'd forgotten existed, $67,000 over 18 months. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was what Vanessa had been posting on Instagram. Luis had accessed her private account through a contact. I won't ask how. I don't want to know. But I saw the posts. Photos of their house with captions like, "Can't wait to renovate once we officially inherit." A picture of my pottery studio with the caption, "Daniel's weird hippie mom's art shack lol. Demo day coming soon. Thinking pool and outdoor kitchen." A selfie of her holding a glass of wine with the text, "Just waiting for the old lady to pass so we can finally live our lives." I stared at those screenshots for a long time. I wasn't hurt. I was past hurt. I was focused. Luis leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "What do you want to do, Mrs. Alvarez?" "I want to bury him, legally, completely. I want him to feel exactly what I felt when I saw that forged signature." Luis nodded. "Then you're going to need a lawyer." I already had one. Maria Gutierrez had been my attorney for 20 years. She'd handled my business contracts, my will, my estate planning. She was 58, sharp as a blade, and she didn't suffer fools. I walked into her office with a folder full of evidence and laid it on her desk. She read through it in silence. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her grip tighten on the pages. Finally, she looked up. "Elena, this is fraud, forgery, possibly elder abuse depending on how the DA wants to charge it. I don't want him arrested." She raised an eyebrow. "I want him exposed, humiliated. I want everyone who thought I was a foolish old woman to see exactly who he is." Maria leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You want revenge. I want justice." She smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Good, because we can bury him legally. He won't see it coming." We spent the next 2 hours building a plan. Step 1. Secure all assets. Lock down bank accounts. Remove Daniel's access to anything with my name on it. File updated paperwork with the county recorder's office to make sure the house deed was ironclad. Step 2. Evict them from the house. It was my property. I had every legal right. 30 days notice. Clean. Official. Step 3. File a formal complaint against the lawyer who'd helped Daniel forge the will. Maria had contacts at the state bar. She'd make sure he faced consequences. Step 4. Rewrite my will. Everything I owned would go to scholarships for single mothers, grants for indigenous artists, and pensions for my employees. Step 5. Public exposure. I'd gather the family, the friends, the community, and I'd tell them everything, not in anger, in clarity. Maria slid a legal pad across the desk. "Write it down, every step. Check them off as you go. Stay methodical. Don't let emotion make you sloppy." I took the pen and started writing. By the time I left her office, I had a checklist, 12 tasks, each one a nail in the coffin Daniel had built for himself. I went home, made a pot of coffee, spread the documents across my kitchen table. Bank statements, forged signatures, Instagram screenshots, property deeds, eviction templates. I worked through the night. At 3 a.m, I stood in my pottery studio, holding a small bowl Daniel had made when he was 10 years old. His fingerprints were still in the clay, uneven, innocent. I almost cried. Then I remembered the forged signature, the dementia lie, the Instagram post about demolishing my studio. I put the bowl down, and I got back to work, because the boy who made that bowl was gone, and the man who tried to steal my life didn't deserve my tears. Have you ever had to become someone you didn't recognize to protect yourself? Have you ever had to choose your dignity over your love? Comment below, because what I was about to do would change everything. Revenge isn't loud. It's not screaming or breaking things or making a scene. Revenge is quiet, calculated, surgical. And mine unfolded over 7 days. Day 1. Daniel and Vanessa were in Cabo. I knew because Vanessa had posted a photo of herself in a bikini holding a margarita. Caption, "Much needed vacay." Funded by my stolen money. While they were sipping drinks on a beach 2,000 miles away, I was standing on the porch of my house, watching a locksmith install new deadbolts. He was a quiet man in his 50s, efficient and professional. He didn't ask questions when I told him I wanted the most secure locks he had. He installed 3: front door, back door, side gate. When he was finished, he handed me a set of keys. "Ma'am, this is the most secure residential lock I've ever installed. Nothing's getting through this without a battering ram." I smiled. Good. Some people don't deserve keys. He gave me a look like he understood more than I'd said. Then he packed up his tools and left. I stood there on that porch, holding the new keys in my hand, feeling their weight. Then I went inside and called the bank. By the time I hung up, every joint account was frozen. Every credit card with Daniel's name on it was canceled. Every automatic payment was stopped. I imagined him trying to pay for drinks at the resort bar tomorrow, the card declining, the confusion on his face. I didn't smile, but I felt something settle in my chest, something solid and final. Day 2. They landed at the Albuquerque airport at 4 in the afternoon. I tracked their Uber on my phone. Luis had shown me how. I watched the little car icon move through the city, onto the freeway, through the North Valley, closer, closer. Then it stopped in front of the house. I wasn't there. I was at a coffee shop 3 miles away, sitting by the window with a cup of tea I wasn't drinking. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Mom, something's wrong with the house. Did you change the locks by accident?" I stared at that message for a full minute. Accident. As if I'd done something foolish, something confused. I typed back, "No accident. Check your mail." Then I turned my phone face down and took a sip of tea. It was cold. I didn't care. 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times. Then the voicemail started. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just lock us out of our own home." Our home. I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. Day 3. Daniel tried to buy gas at a station on Coors Boulevard. His credit card was declined. He called the bank. They told him the account had been closed by the primary cardholder. Me. He tried another card. Declined. Another. Declined. Vanessa called her parents for money. They wired her $500 and told her to figure it out. That same afternoon, a sheriff's deputy knocked on the door of the house, delivered an official eviction notice, 30 days to vacate the premises. Daniel called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer once. Day 4. The lawyer who'd helped Daniel forge the will received a formal ethics complaint from the New Mexico State Bar Association. Maria had filed it with every piece of evidence we had: forged documents, false medical claims, fraud. He called Daniel in a rage. I know because Luis was still tracking Daniel's phone activity. The call lasted 43 minutes. I can only imagine what was said, but I knew one thing for sure. That lawyer wasn't going to help Daniel anymore. Day 5, 6, and 7. I prepared. I baked biscochitos, cleaned my studio, set up folding tables and chairs in the courtyard, ordered flowers from the market. I printed documents, blown up copies of the forged will, side-by-side comparisons of signatures, screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram posts. I practiced my speech in the mirror, not because I needed the words, but because I needed to see my own face when I said them, needed to make sure I wouldn't cry. I invited everyone I cared about to a retirement celebration. Family, friends, employees, community leaders, 30 people. I didn't tell them what it was really about, and I invited Daniel and Vanessa too, because I wanted them there when the truth came out. On the 6th evening, I stood in my pottery studio, holding that little bowl Daniel had made when he was 10. I looked at his fingerprints in the clay, his child hands, his innocent mistakes. I almost put the bowl in a box, almost kept it, almost let myself believe there was still something worth saving. Then I remembered the forged signature, the Instagram post about tearing down my studio, the lie about my dementia. I put the bowl back on the shelf, and I walked out. Day 7. The locksmith came back. I'd asked him to install one more lock, a deadbolt on the casita where I'd been sleeping. He installed it without a word, handed me the key. "Ma'am, you want me to install cameras too, just in case?" I shook my head. "No, I want him to know I did this with my own 2 hands." He nodded, packed up his tools, left. I stood there in the doorway, holding the new key, feeling the click of the lock as I tested it. Solid, final, mine. I thought about Daniel on that porch, trying to get into a house that was never his, trying to open a door I'd closed, and I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Could you lock your own child out of a house? Could you choose your dignity over their comfort? Tell me in the comments, because the hardest part was still coming. The afternoon sun slanted through the cottonwood trees, casting long shadows across my pottery studio courtyard. String lights crisscrossed overhead, glowing soft and golden even in daylight. Folding tables covered in bright cloth held bowls of pozole, platters of bizcochitos, fresh tortillas wrapped in warm towels. A mariachi band tuned their instruments in the corner. The smell of red chili and cinnamon hung in the air. 30 people filled the space. My employees, my oldest friends, distant cousins, Uncle Roberto in his veteran's cap, Clara, my fellow potter, Maria, my attorney, standing near the back with her arms folded and her eyes sharp, and Daniel and Vanessa. They arrived late, looking confused. Vanessa wore a tight smile and a designer dress. Daniel kept glancing around like he was trying to figure out the angle. They hadn't spoken to me in a week, not since the locks, not since the eviction notice. But they came, because they thought I was backing down, thought this was my way of apologizing, of smoothing things over, of being the foolish, forgiving mother I'd always been. They were wrong. I stood at the front of the courtyard, my hands folded, waiting for the crowd to settle. The mariachi band stopped playing. Conversations faded. People turned to face me. I smiled. Thank you all for coming. It means the world to me to see so many faces I love in one place. Warm murmurs. A few people raised their glasses. I continued. 40 years ago, I lost my husband and gained a purpose. I built this business with my hands and my heart. I raised my son alone. I worked until my fingers bled and my back ached and my eyes couldn't stay open. And I did it because I believed in something. Family, legacy, love. People nodded. A few wiped their eyes. I paused. But I also want to address something painful, something I need you all to witness. The mood shifted. The smiles faded. People glanced at each other, uncertain. I reached for the remote in my pocket and clicked. The projector screen behind me lit up. On it, side by side, were 2 signatures. Mine, real, and mine, forged. The room went silent. I heard someone gasp. I didn't look at Daniel. Not yet. "This," I said, my voice calm and steady, "is a document my son tried to file with an estate attorney 3 weeks ago. A revised will, one that would give him complete control of my assets, my property, and my life." Another click. A medical document appeared, signed by a doctor I'd never met, claiming I had early-onset dementia. He also submitted this, a fraudulent medical assessment claiming I'm incompetent, that I can't manage my own affairs, that I need to be declared mentally unfit so he can take power of attorney. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People looked at Daniel. He stood frozen, his face pale. I clicked again. Vanessa's Instagram post filled the screen, 10 feet tall, her holding a glass of wine. The caption, "Just waiting for the old lady to pass so we can finally live our lives." Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another click. The post about my studio. Daniel's weird hippie mom's art shack LOL. Demo day coming soon. Clara, my fellow potter, stood up. Her face was red. "Elena, is this real?" I nodded. Every word. I finally looked at Daniel. He was standing now, his fists clenched, his face twisted in panic and rage. This is slander. She's lying. She's confused. Everyone, you have to listen to me. She's sick." Uncle Roberto, 73 years old and a veteran of 2 wars, stood up and pointed at Daniel. "Sit down, boy. I saw the documents." Daniel looked around the room, desperate. No one was on his side. Vanessa grabbed her purse. "I don't have to listen to this. This is humiliating." She turned and headed for the gate. I kept talking. "I've rewritten my will. My estate will fund scholarships for single mothers in New Mexico. It will provide grants for indigenous artists. It will create pensions for the people who've worked beside me for 20 years. I paused. "Daniel will receive $1, so no one can say I forgot him." The room erupted, not in anger, in shock, in whispers and wide eyes and glances at Daniel. He exploded. "You're doing this for attention. You're a spiteful old woman. You were a terrible mother anyway. You were never there. You cared more about your stupid pottery than you did about me." His voice cracked. His face was red and streaked with tears he didn't seem to realize were falling. I didn't flinch. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger. "You're right," I said quietly. "I wasn't perfect. I missed soccer games. I worked too much. I sacrificed my time because I thought providing for you was love." I took a breath. "But I never lied to you. I never stole from you. I never forged your name or tried to declare you incompetent so I could take everything you had." The room was silent. Daniel stood there, shaking, his mouth open like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he turned and walked out. The gate slammed behind him. I stood there, my hands steady, my heart pounding. Clara stood and walked over. She put her arms around me and whispered, "Elena, you are the bravest woman I know." I shook my head. Bravery is just exhaustion dressed up and standing its ground. I turned back to the crowd. "I'm sorry you had to see that, but I needed witnesses. I needed you to know the truth, because some trees must be pruned to grow." I raised my glass. "To family, the one you build, not the one that bleeds you dry." Glasses clinked. People wiped their eyes. Someone started clapping, and then everyone joined in. The mariachi band started playing again, and I stood there, surrounded by people who loved me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Have you ever had to stand up in front of everyone and tell the truth, even when it destroyed someone you loved? Drop a heart emoji if you understand why I had to do this. 3 months later, Fall arrived in New Mexico like a whisper. The cottonwood trees turned gold. The air smelled like piñon smoke and crisp mornings. The Sandia Mountains glowed pink at sunset, the way they always did when the world was about to sleep. I stood in my studio, my hands wet with clay, the wheel humming beneath my palms as I shaped a bowl. Even. Whole. It was the first thing I'd made for myself in 40 years. Everything else had been for someone else, for customers, for galleries, for Daniel. But this bowl was mine. I thought about how much had changed. Daniel and Vanessa were living in a rental across town, a small place, 2 bedrooms, no yard, no casita, no pottery studio to mock. I heard from a cousin that they were struggling. Credit card debt. Vanessa's parents had cut them off financially after the humiliation at my gathering. Daniel couldn't find steady work because word had spread in our tight-knit community about what he'd tried to do. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel angry either. I felt nothing, and that was a kind of peace. My scholarship fund had awarded its first grants. 3 single mothers. One was Navajo, studying nursing at UNM. One was a young woman from Espanola who wanted to be a teacher. One was a sculptor learning to work with bronze. I'd handed them their checks in person. We'd cried together. They'd thanked me like I'd saved their lives. I told them the same thing every time. You earned it. That's the difference. My studio had expanded too. 2 new kilns, 6 apprentices, a grant from the State Arts Council. I was teaching pottery to at-risk teenagers twice a week after school. 15 kids who needed a place to put their hands and their pain. And I'd met Frank. He owned a bookstore in Old Town, a quiet man with kind eyes and silver hair and hands that smelled like old paper and coffee. We'd started having dinner once a week, then twice. Now he came over most evenings, and we'd sit on the porch with glasses of wine and talk about books and art and nothing important at all. He didn't want anything from me except my company. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever given me. I slept through the night now. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't wake up at 2 a.m. with my chest tight and my mind racing. I slept, deep and dreamless, safe. One evening in late October, just as the sun was setting, there was a knock at my door. I opened it. Daniel stood on the porch, unshaven, thinner, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. "What do you want, Daniel?" He shifted his weight, looked at the ground, looked back at me. "Everyone thinks I'm a monster. You humiliated me in front of the whole family, in front of everyone I know." I didn't answer. He kept going, his voice rising. "You had no right. I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? Don't I deserve anything after everything I've been through?" I stared at him. "What have you been through, Daniel?" He blinked. What? What have you been through? A free college education? 2 business failures I paid for without complaint? A house you lived in rent-free for 5 years? A mother who gave you everything she had? His jaw tightened. "I need money. Vanessa and I are drowning. We can't keep up with rent. We can't." "Stop." He stopped. I took a breath. I needed respect. I needed to be seen as something more than a bank account. I needed to know my son loved me and not just what I could give him. I looked him in the eyes. "I guess we're both disappointed." His face twisted. "I'm your blood, your family. You owe me." I shook my head. "I don't owe you anything, not anymore." He stood there, shaking with rage or grief or both. I couldn't tell, didn't care. "This isn't over," he said. Then he turned and walked away. I closed the door, slid the new deadbolt into place, heard the click, felt the weight of it, the finality. and I was okay. I made a cup of chamomile tea, walked back to my studio, sat at the wheel. The clay spun beneath my hands, cool and wet and soft. I shaped it slowly, carefully. No rush, no pressure. Just my hands and the clay and the quiet hum of the wheel. When I was finished, I had a bowl. Simple, smooth, perfect. I held it up to the light. It was whole. Frank came over an hour later. He knocked gently and let himself in. He'd started doing that. I'd given him a key. He found me in the studio cleaning up. "You're lighter now," he said, studying my face. "I can see it in your eyes." I smiled. I put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. He kissed my forehead. We walked back to the house together. That night, I sat on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of tea in my hands. The stars were bright. The air was cool. I thought about Daniel, about the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. And I realized something. I'd spent 40 years building a life. He'd spent 40 seconds trying to steal it. But you can't steal what you never valued. And I finally valued myself. The next morning, one of my scholarship recipients sent me a photo. Her at her first day of nursing school, smiling, hopeful. She wrote, "You gave me a future." I wrote back, "You earned it. That's the difference." And I meant it. I'm 63 years old now. My hands still shape clay. My studio still smells like earth and water and fire. My work still sits in galleries across New Mexico. But something's different. I'm different. I finally learned the hardest lesson of my life. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't love people who only see you as a wallet. So I chose me. And I've never been richer. Real family respects you alive, not just your money dead. That's the truth I want you to take from this. The truth I wish I'd learned 40 years ago. Have you ever had to choose yourself over someone you loved? Have you ever walked away from family because staying was killing you? What would you do if your own blood treated you like an ATM? Drop a yellow heart in the comments if you believe dignity is worth more than blood. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who take more than they give, then subscribe. Because standing up for yourself is the most important story you'll ever tell. And maybe, just maybe, you'll save someone else from learning this lesson the hard way. I rebuilt my life on my own terms, with my own hands, in my own time. You can too. Some locks are meant to stay changed.